All right, welcome everyone to this meeting of SABR's East Coast Cooperative, a group of 7 chapters in Eastern Canada and the United States who are working together to bring you more great presentations. I'm Bruce McClure, the chair of the Clyde Sukeforth chapter in Maine and New Hampshire, and tonight we have another great speaker for you. But first, I wanted to remind our members that this evening, the Boston chapter's Zoom social begins right after this meeting at 8 p.m. Eastern. And as we go along, I'll drop a sign-up link in the chat for those who need it. But now on to our feature presentation. Most sports fans know that Ted Williams ended his major league career in style, swatting a home run in his final at-bat. But what about Babe Ruth, Ty Cobb, Joe DiMaggio, Willie Mays? How did some of baseball's greatest players bow out of the game? Last Time Out answers that question as it examines how the greatest players in baseball history left the game they once ruled. The stories of these men and how they finished their careers, never collected anywhere before now, show another side of the men whose achievements on the field made them legends. After hours and hours of research through biographies, microfilm, magazines, and memories, award-winning sports writer John Nogowski culled the stories of the final games of 25 of baseball's greatest athletes. John Nogowski has worked at newspapers from New Hampshire to Florida and is a 3-time national winner in the AP Sports Editor competition with many other state and regional honors. He resides in Tallahassee, Florida, and he is here tonight to discuss his book, Last Time Out. And maybe he's got a surprise for you as well. John Nogowski, welcome. How are you doing this evening?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. And I want to note that this particular version of Last Time Out actually has 43 players in there. And the 44th player is actually my son's first major league game. But we'll get into that in a little bit later. But thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be with all of you guys. And this is fun. I met Bruce at the APSC, or excuse me, the SABR national meeting this particular summer at Minneapolis, and we had a chance to chat a little bit, and he had mentioned about this particular event, and I just thought this would be a lot of fun. So I'm happy to share some stories, and I'm also happy to answer any questions that you might have once we kind of get rolling.
You know what? I'm just going to step aside, but tell me a little bit before you get going about how you got started in writing. I know that you were a teacher as well in your past lives and careers, but tell us how you got started in all of that. I know you've also written a book about Dylan, right?
I've done a bunch of books, actually. I did this one Last Time Out.
Right.
Just this past May, I did this book, which is Nashua, about my very first job at the Nashua Telegraph, which sponsored a debate between Ronald Reagan and George Bush that ended up being quite important, I think, in Republican circles. So this was an interesting one.
And I'm not that far from Nashua, actually. I'm in New London. Yeah, go ahead.
And then this is the 3rd edition of a book I've done for McFarland and Company on Bob Dylan, sort of a comprehensive book. And this one came out in 2022. I think it's like 352 pages. All 3 editions, and it's comprehensive. Everything he's done: movies, speeches, books, albums, bootlegs. I mean, all kinds of stuff. So it's been a lot of fun. And I got started in writing. I went to actually a girls' college, believe it or not. Yeah, Rivier College, it was called back then. It's Rivier University now in Nashua. And I liked writing in high school, and I was an athlete. And I went to Rivier College, and all of a sudden it's a girls' school. They took in like 10 or 15 guys every year to get federal funds. And one morning I was in the student lounge, and I made a comment to some young lady who had played this one song like 4 times, 5 times, 6 times in a row. And I made a comment to her like, geez, there's other songs on that jukebox, So she said, well, why don't you write what would you listen to? What's the last record you bought? And it just happened to be Bob Dylan's Planet Waves. And she says, why don't you write a review of it? I said, for who? And she said, for the student newspaper. She was the editor, which I didn't know. So I wrote that and had some success, decided I'd major in English. And once I got out of college, I applied to newspapers all over the place And the only place that gave me a chance was the Nashua Telegraph, which was my hometown paper. And, they had stories about me when I played baseball at the school and all. And so I started working there, and I worked there for 7 years, and that kind of started my newspaper career. And I worked in New Haven, Connecticut. I worked in Framingham, Massachusetts, and Port Huron, Michigan, and then had some success winning a bunch of awards and so on, and that got me down here to Tallahassee, where I covered Florida State sports for 7 years, and then I went into teaching a little bit at Florida State and a couple of community colleges, and then I did 12 years as a high school teacher. So I've had a pretty good background to do all kinds of different things. And I've started a Substack back in May. I just posted a story, or I will post a story tomorrow about Macbeth. So I got a little bit of everything,
But I'm going to go out on a limb and say that baseball is your favorite thing to write about. Isn't that right? That's right, isn't it, John?
Yeah, it was my, the sport I was best at. It was the sport I probably spent more time watching and reading about and writing about, probably than any other. I had my baseball writer's card for a year when I was in Michigan.
Huh, okay.
That was the Sparky Anderson team with, Cecil Fielder and Fred Lynn and,
oh, wow.
Lynn Trammell and Lou Whitaker, all those old guys.
Wait a minute. Those were guys that I watched. Come on, John. Old. Oh, you're killing me.
But it was fun, and I got to see Nolan Ryan win his 298th game, at Tiger Stadium, and Roger Clemens pitch at Tiger Stadium for the Blue Jays, and Seiko hit home runs, and I mean it was just fun, and of course growing up in New England, I went to a lot of Red Sox games, and actually had some funny things that ended up getting into Last Time Out. The book Last Time Out, this one, is the second edition, actually. I did one in 2005, and my publisher, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, I had an occasion to chat with him, and he said, it's time to update your book. A lot of different guys that you didn't cover in the first book have retired, David Ortiz, Mariano Rivera, Derek Jeter, and so on. I said, yeah, that's a good point. So I started updating the book, including some of these guys, Barry Bonds and Clemens and so on. Mm-hmm. And I was about halfway through it. And in the meantime, my son had come through the Cardinal system and made the major leagues. So I got about halfway through, and I said, every story in this book is about the guy's last game. What if the last chapter in the book, chapter 44, is about my son's first game? And my editor said, geez, that's a great idea. Let's do that. So that's what we did. So there's 44 chapters in there. 43 of them are about, some of baseball's greatest players and their endings. And how I came about with the idea was kind of an interesting story, Bruce. John Updike, who I'm sure mm-hmm. you've read, Cub fans bid Kid-a-doo, his famous of Ted's final game and his home run, came to Florida State, maybe like 25 years ago, I guess it was. And I had a chance to interview him because I was working for the local paper. So all we talked about was that article. And on the way home, I started thinking, I remember Babe Ruth had a 3 home run game, but I couldn't remember if it was his last game or not. And I, of course, had seen Carl Yastrzemski's last game, being a Red Sox fan. And I had just visited the Hall of Fame like a couple of weeks before that. So I called the Hall of Fame, the guy that was the PR guy for him, Bill Guerfoyle, used to be the Pirates PR guy.
Yep.
And I said, Bill, this is John Nogowski. I said, tell me this is not a bad idea. What if I did a book about the final games of some of baseball's greatest players? And he goes, John, I get 200 pitches a year. He said, nobody's done that book. He says, call Jill Langford. She works in Indiana for Roman and Littlefield. She'll give you a book deal. So I made a phone call, told Jill the idea, and she's like, that's a great idea. Who do you want to do? And it was like that, 2 phone calls, and I had a book deal. I mean, that's not the way it's supposed to work, Bruce. And so we kind of went from there.
Took me more than 2 phone calls to get my job in interior decoration. I mean, come on.
Yeah. I mean, it was lucky. And what was fun about it was just doing the research. Now, this was the first edition of this. I had to spend a whole summer in Florida State Strozier Library kind of combing through the microfiche, I mean, because there just wasn't, the internet just wasn't much use at that point. So, stuff like Ty Cobb, I'm looking at, I knew what his last season was, playing for the Philadelphia A's. And I started at the end of the season and there were no Ty Cobb entries in the box scores. So I was like, what the hell? And I'd read books and I'd never seen anybody cover that. Well, it turned out that they made a run at the pennant and they got swept by the Yankees. And Ty Cobb was kind of reduced to finally the last time he got up was he was up as a pinch hitter and he popped out and he said, the hell with it. I'm going to go see the Dempsey Tunney fight. And that was it. He was done. But as I started to look through all these different stories about all these guys, some of them were just fascinating and I'd never heard them. Like one of the best ones to me, and this made me laugh. Dizzy Dean. Okay. All-star pitcher for the Cardinals, pitches in the All-Star game. Earl Averill hits his ankle with a line drive, comes back too soon, screws up his arm, kind of hangs on for a while, then goes into broadcasting. So he's a Cardinal broadcaster. Everybody loves the guy, right? So he does that for a couple of years. Then all of a sudden the station decides they're going to hire a guy named Harry Caray. And they demote Dizzy to doing the St. Louis Browns, who were the worst team in baseball. So knowing Dizzy Dean, knowing a little about his history, you can imagine that was a match made in hell. So all season long, all he did was pitch about how bad the Browns, hell, I could go out there now, dude, So the last day of the season, he gets summoned to the owner's office, walks in, and the owner has a contract on his desk for $1. He says, okay, Big Mouth, you've been complaining about our pitching all year long. Here's the ball. You're starting today. So they had to scramble to find a uniform for him because he put on a few pounds. He went out and threw 4 shutout innings. And then he hit a double, pulled a muscle in his leg, sliding into second base. His wife stands up in the stands and says, get that damn fool off the field. So they took him out, of course, and the Browns bullpen, of course, gave up the lead. He had a lead at the time. So he didn't get the win, but that was the last time he pitched. I never heard that story.
What?
I thought that was really a cool story. I'd never heard that. I'd read books about Dizzy Dean. I never read that before. So that was the kind of thing that I thought, well, geez, I bet you there's a bunch of uncovered kind of stories in here about these guys' careers. And like Babe Ruth, for example, he did have a 3 home run game at Pittsburgh. The last home run was the first fair ball hit out of Forbes Field. And, through research, I found out that actually when he came around the bases, he actually went and sat down in the visitor's dugout, or the home dugout rather than go to his dugout because he was so tired and so out of shape. And when he came in, when he got home, his wife and some of his friends were telling him, babe, that should be it. You should leave the game. That's the perfect win. And he wanted to. But the owners told him, well, you've never played in the National League before. They've sold tickets here and they've sold tickets there. So he played, I think, 7 more games, as I recall.
I think that's right. Yes.
His final at bat was a little ground ball to first base. He went out to left field, and a guy named Lou Chiazza hit a sinking line drive that he dove for, missed it, hurt his knee, and then came trotting in, and that was the end of his career.
How did you choose the subjects of this book?
That's a good question. I tried to pick the best players, the ones that seemed to have a good story. So there were some that, like Honus Wagner, he's a great player. Geez, you want to include him. But there really was no story about the last game he played. He came in as a defensive replacement, played a couple of innings, and that was it. He didn't even get up. So I was, so I kind of moved on from that one. Gehrig, of course, was a tragic story. And, that was one that was, you had to include, of course, somebody that famous. One of the great ones was Satchel Paige. At 59 years old, the Kansas City A's are not drawing at all. So I think they had something like 400 or 658 people or something like that,
Yeah.
2 or 3 games before that.
Yep.
So Charlie Finley hires Satchel, and he comes out and throws 3 shutout innings, and he gives up just 1 hit to Carl Yastrzemski on a 3-0 count.
Yep.
And what was funny about that was Satchel faced Yaz's dad in pickup games, or exhibition games, whatever you want to call it, barnstorming ones. And his dad hit a triple off him. Paul Yaz, younger Yaz, a Hall of Famer, all he got was a double. So you sure there was some banter going on. What I didn't know at the time when I wrote the first book, was that the first guy Satchel Paige faced, the last guy Satchel Paige faced, was Jim Gosger, who was major leaguer, played with the Red Sox, the A's, the Mets a little bit, the Expos. And I got to be friends with him when I worked in Port Huron, because that was his hometown. So I never knew that. And so once I found that out, of course, I asked Jim all about it. And, he remembered it really well. So I included that, of course, in the updated version. And pretty cool, 59-year-old. And he said, you could see how great this guy was. He says, everything was low and hard. He said, and at 59, obviously he didn't have the velocity that he did when he was young, but he said, you could just tell, when he was a young guy, he was just really, really a tough guy to hit. So it's kind of like that. And there were a few personal moments in there that were fun. One including Reggie Jackson. For some reason, I had a thing with Reggie Jackson that, do you remember when he got into the fight with Billy Martin in the dugout?
I can see it in my dreams. Yeah.
Yeah, I was there. Right?
Really?
When you remember I don't know if you remember the game. I think he had like 10 or 12 RBIs in one game at Fenway Park. And they found out afterwards that one side of his bat was flat.
Yes.
And he hit one ball off the wall in that game that almost bounced all the way to second base on the air. That's how hard he hit it. So I was there for that one. And I was also there on a Friday night, the next to last game of the 1976 season, when he was doing his purgatory with Baltimore. And and we had lousy seats. We're down in right field, right field in Fenway, you're a mile away from everything.
Yep.
But that was what we got. So anyway, his first at bat, he hits a little 2-hopper and just trots to first base. Didn't run at all. So I was a little more vocal in those days, being a college student and all that. So when he came out to right field, he got a chorus of boo, boo, come on, Reggie, well, and he turns around and looks right at me. What are you getting on my ass for? Right? I mean, right in the middle, right in the middle of the game. I'm like, we want to see Reggie Jackson. We don't want to see you trot to first base. Come on, man. So we got into it a little bit. So then he's like, well, what's it going to do for you guys to get off my ass? And what do you think? We want to see you hit a home run. He goes, yeah, you guys are going to stand up and cheer for me in Fenway Park, me playing for the Orioles if I hit a home run. I said, yeah. And of course, all the people around me, heard this dialogue going on. So they were like, yeah, go ahead. So 7th inning, he comes up against Rick Wise, and he hits one.
Oh, there's a name.
And he hits one in the screen. He hits one in the damn screen. So he's running to first base, and he's looking down in right field to see if we're standing up and cheering for him, So we all, and everybody around me, of course, heard this. So when he came out to his position at the end of the inning, after the home run, everybody gave him a standing ovation. And the Red Sox people are like, what are you guys doing cheering for Reggie? I mean, that happened, that really happened. So it was fun stuff like that, just finding things about some of these guys' final games, whether it was, Nolan Ryan or Bob Gibson or whoever it was. It was just kind of a fun thing to do. And I think in a lot of ways, kind of untold stories.
Who did you leave out? Did you leave anybody out that you researched?
Oh, yeah. There were a few guys that, there just wasn't that much there to do much with. And it's good that you asked that, because that's a good segue into the new book that I have coming out.
Oh, wait a minute. Surprise. Tell us a little bit about that too.
I'm glad you asked.
All right.
Now, how do I share? I did.
So we're going to go back
such
to the share button down the bottom of the screen. You'll click that and then what you want to show.
All right.
You were so good at this a minute ago. There it is. He did it.
Oh, there it is. Called Diamond Duels, Baseball's Greatest Matchups. And as you can see, that's Greg Maddux and Tony Gwynn. And fortunately, it is soundproofed, so you can't hear what Greg Maddux would be saying if he was facing Tony Gwynn, because it would probably be a little bit blue. You know what I mean? And how this book came about was kind of a strange thing. My son was playing in the Dominican.
You okay there, John?
Yeah, hold on a minute. Just gotta
Sorry.
This is here. Huh?
So if you have another picture to share, you'll just click the picture.
How do I go back to you?
Do you want me to take this off screen sharing?
Yeah, you can.
There it is. He's got a little bit more for us to see.
Good. So what happened with my son was playing in the Dominican Republic. Yeah, this is the one I showed you. Yes, with Ted on the cover. This one. Yeah, that's the most recent edition. My son was playing in the Dominican Republic, and it turned out that the pitching coach was an 80-year-old guy. Let's see if you remember the name. Phil Regan.
Oh gosh, really?
The Vulture. Remember the Vulture?
Yep.
16-1, and thanks to Sandy Koufax and Don Drysdale.
Yep.
Okay. He got the nickname from Sandy because he got so many wins in these late innings. Well, anyway, he and John were going to go play golf. So, John is pretty well versed in baseball history, thanks to his father, but 1966, 1950 baseball, not so much. So I said, well, let me do a little research here and give him some things to talk to Phil about. I found this site called StatHead, which I hadn't really used much before. I've heard of it, but I hadn't really used it. So I'm just kind of piddling around, and all of a sudden I find, let's look up Stan Musial's record. Great career. Everybody loved the guy. What the heck? Let's see who's the pitcher he faced and all. Well, StatHead lists every single plate appearance that this guy had in his career. So here's all Musial's at bats from when he started to when he finished. And then a list of all the pitchers he faced. He faced one guy 352 times.
Regan.
That's like one season against one guy. And I was like, wow, I never knew that. It was Warren Spahn.
Oh, Spahny. That's right. That's right.
And, that just kind of blew me away. I was like, geez, I've read a bunch of books about Stan Musial. I've read books about Warren Spahn and baseball and all that. I never knew he had that many at-bats against him. My goodness. So then that kind of led to other things where I started looking at Whitey Ford, great New York Yankee pitcher, Hall of Famer, but 236 lifetime wins for a team that kicked the bejesus pretty much out of everybody for years and years and years and years. All these World Series appearances and everything else. So I thought, well, that's a little surprising that he didn't have more wins than that. And he didn't get 20 wins until, kind of well into his career.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the reason turned out that Casey Stengel was pretty careful about who he pitched him against. And this one really kind of blew me away. 72 lifetime starts for Whitey Ford against the White Sox, 71 or something like that against the Cleveland Indians, 42 against the Boston Red Sox, and 6 seasons with not a single start at Fenway Park.
Interesting.
So, here's the arch rival, Yankees, Red Sox. It's a Friday night. Here's the Yankees in for a 3-game series. No, Whitey, we're not going to pitch you here. We're going to save you for next week when you face the White Sox. What?
Interesting.
So, looking into that, he had like a 6 ERA at Fenway. Who knew? So finding things like this were just really interesting to me. And that's kind of what I went into with Diamond Duels, was just to see, everybody makes a huge deal out of Ty Cobb and how well he did against Walter Johnson. Well, yeah, he had a very high lifetime batting average against Walter Johnson. But if you go in and really look at it, it was built on the strength of 2 seasons when Johnson was done.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can't throw 300 plus innings, especially for not a very good team, for most of that time, and not have it show on your arm. And he was pretty much done. So all of those big numbers that Cobb put up were pretty much just over those 2 seasons. Otherwise, I think he had like a 256 lifetime average against him. No big deal. Nothing to brag about, that's for sure. And so I kind of did that, with Diamond Duels, comparing Ted Williams' career to Joe DiMaggio's career, and looking at it, from the numbers, how one guy did against the Red Sox, how Ted did against the Yankees, and so on. It was just fascinating. And there were some anomalies that you just wouldn't believe. For example, maybe the greatest right-handed hitter of all time, Roger Hornsby, right?
Mm-hmm.
Fabulous hitter, right? 358 lifetime average. So what,
Mm-hmm.
7 batting titles, I think, something like that. So I'm looking at his numbers and the pitchers he faced, and against all the guys from his era, the Hall of Famers, Burley Grinds and guys like that. 300, 380, 420, 46. All of a sudden, I get down to a guy named Ben Caldwell, who was a tidy 4-25 for the Boston Braves of 1936.
Oof.
And Hornsby couldn't hit him. He had a 130 lifetime batting average against this guy. And to get to 130, he got a hit his last time up. I think he got a double. And that was it. He couldn't hit him. So that made me thinking, well, geez, what about some of these other great hitters? Let's see who they had problems with. So that, I would look through Ted Williams, and there was a guy named Jim Wilson, who was sort of a journeyman pitcher of the day. He had a lifetime record about 500. Williams hit 200 against him. And I think, if I remember right, I think he had to get 2 or 3 hits the last game to get to that number. And so that was kind of fun, just finding these guys that some of the greatest hitters in the game had trouble with. And one other one that I found very interesting. Bruce, and you know this, everybody makes a huge deal, as they probably should, of Ted Williams getting 6 hits in 8 at-bats in 1941 to wind up at 406.
That's right.
Right? And they didn't count sacrifice flies in those days, so it probably would have been 412, really, if we had modern rules. What I didn't know, somebody who preceded Ted not only got 6 hits on the last day of the season to win the batting title, 2 years later got 7 hits on the final day of the season to win the batting title. Never heard of it. Never knew anything about it.
Lajoie?
Oh, good guess, though. Played for the Tigers.
Anybody else want to chime in here? If anybody has an idea, just unmute.
You'll know the name. As soon as I say the name, you'll know it. But
the only thing I can think of is K-Line.
Heilman.
There you go.
Heilman. Thank you, Dixie. Save me again.
Harry Heilman. Yep. 6 hits to finish the season with the batting title. And he had a heck of a race, going on. There were like 3, 4, 5 guys all kind of contending for it. And then a couple of years later had 7 hits in the final doubleheader of this. They had doubleheaders at the end of the season in those days. Never knew it. Never heard that story anywhere before. So that was cool, So it's stuff like that where I kind of just went in and, the game's greatest match, how Nolan Ryan did against these guys, or how, Don Drysdale, for example, and Hank Aaron was a good one. Good question. Were you able to determine why certain players couldn't hit certain pitchers? I don't think I could necessarily say that. In the case of Rogers Hornsby and Ben Caldwell, Caldwell was a junk baller. I mean, he never struck more than 57 guys out in a season. So you assume it was just junk. He just, Hornsby had trouble hitting that. Some of the other guys, it's kind of hard to say. But, just looking at it was fascinating. Don Drysdale and Hank Aaron was another one that I thought was really interesting. Hank Aaron, as we know, one of the greatest hitters in the history of the game. I think, if I remember right, he was 0 for 21 starting his career against Don Drysdale. And Drysdale, as you remember, big, tall right-hander, threw sidearm, and was not afraid to come inside and knock you on your fanny. And that was what he did with Aaron, was knock him down, knock him down, knock him down, usually once or twice in at bat. And finally, it got to a point where the manager, Hank, was kind of freaked out. In those days, if you sat, they'd find somebody else to play that position. It's not like you get guaranteed contracts and all that. So the manager had one of the lineups made out, and Hank wasn't in it because Drysdale was pitching. And Hank went over and talked to the manager and said, look, you got to play me against this guy. I know I can hit him. And he got a couple of blue hits that day. And from that point on, he hit tremendously against him. I think he had 17 lifetime home runs against Drysdale, which was the most he hit against any individual pitcher. There was another little tidbit there. Take a guess, Saber Nation here. What single player had the most home runs off a particular pitcher? One guy, one pitcher. Who had the most home runs in the history of the game against a single pitcher?
While you are deliberating that question, ladies and gentlemen, if you have a question or a comment for John, go down to the bottom of the screen like Gary Joquin did and hit the react button. You'll see raise hand. Click that button. We'll get you in line to ask questions of our presenter tonight, John Nogowski. John, reiterate that question for us, would you please?
What player had the most lifetime home runs off a single pitcher? In other words, one guy against one pitcher. What was the highest total that any individual player got against any individual pitcher in the history of baseball? It's a name you know. And it's probably not who you think it is. You'll know.
Okay, so there goes my guess, because I was going to say Bonds.
No, Bonds is a good guess, but no, isn't him.
Bruce, Alec put in the chat Willie Mays.
That's a good guess, but no, not him.
Let's leave that one out there and let people think about it for a minute. Gary Joquin, let's get your question on air. How you doing, Gary? Oh,
that's a good idea, but not quite that. It's not the Babe either.
Go ahead, Gary.
Yeah, just starting to phrase it. I think I can explain it and ask the question more succinctly now. There was an anecdotal story I remember from the NBA where David Robinson was the team that he played in the last game of the season played soft defense on him so that he would be able to score 71 points and steal the scoring title from another player that the other players hated. With Heilman and other players who did exceptionally well in the last game or two of the season, have you found any evidence of teams going soft on a particular player so that they could take part in helping them to rob the batting title from another player they didn't like?
Yeah, the only one that I know of was, that I really saw, and this has been kind of backed up by a lot of people, is the famous 1910 one between Ty Cobb and Napoleon Lajoie, where the Chalmers Company had promised to give a brand new car to whoever won the batting title. So Cobb went to the last day of the season. It was a doubleheader, and he had a 9-point lead. So he figured, I'm just going to sit this one out, and I'm going to get my new car. And in those days, players didn't make the kind of money that they do now. So getting a new car was a big deal. Well, Lajoie triples in his first at bat against the Orioles, gets to third base, and we're not exactly sure how the word got to him, but the word gets to him that you don't need to go to all that trouble. I'm going to play deep. Bunt. So he bunted and bunted and bunted and bunted. And so if the American League office had counted things right, Lajoie would have been the batting champion that season. But when they, totaled up all the statistics and everything, they counted one of Cobb's games twice. So Cobb ended up barely edging Lajoie out for the batting title. And the Chalmers Company, as it turned out, gave cars to both of them. And obviously they got a lot of publicity about it. So it was a pretty cool thing. And the manager was suspended for life for that. The third baseman was a rookie, and they didn't suspend him because I guess he was just following orders. But I always wondered, since they make a big deal about steroids and Pete Rose and all this other stuff, and legitimately, nobody's ever talked about those hits that Lajoie got, that they gave him, basically. I think it was 7 bunts, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right.
Nobody said anything about taking those hits away from him. One of the little dark moments in baseball history. Speaking of dark moments, shoeless Joe Jackson. John Bartolick, you're on the money. That's who it is.
As a member of SABR, I have an honor code, but I use all the tools.
I was about to say you looked that up.
Well, I make
Duke
no
Snyder.
illusions about my skill here.
Yep, Duke Snyder. Most home runs off of, folks. Any ideas who?
Robin Roberts. It's in the chat.
Roberts. Yep.
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 How many?
Roberts, yep. 19.
19. Yep.
19.
First baseball book I ever read was about Duke Snyder. Interesting.
Really?
Yeah.
Really? That's cool.
Yeah, it's probably
He was
late
he was a
80s.
great player.
Yeah.
And playing in New York with Willie and Mickey, I mean, that's kind of a tough deal, But he was
Probably still why I love the Dodgers and don't like the Yankees.
There you
Like I'm dead serious. Right.
If you don't like the Yankees, you're a good man. That's the way I.
Thanks, John.
Here we go.
Red Sox and everyone was playing the Yankees. That's the way it goes.
What other questions or comments do we have for John tonight? We've got him for a little while more here before we've got a break to go to Boston's social. I can recall seeing Tom Seaver's last home start in his career.
Mhm.
Who was he pitching for?
Last home start?
His last home start.
Well, his last year was with the Red Sox.
That's right.
And he's mentioned in Last Time Out, his final game.
Okay.
And
that was on the road.
That's a good what if too, because had they had him for the 1986 World Series against the Mets,
they'd have won it.
They might have thrown him in Game 7.
Yeah.
Instead of, who that was, it Dick Drago? Was that who they started?
No.
I don't remember who it was. It certainly wasn't.
Drago was out of baseball by then, I think.
Yeah.
Oh.
It was, I can't remember who it was, but
Bruce Hurst.
no,
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was Hurst.
Hurst was MVP, or would have been MVP if they'd have won. I'm sorry, I can't remember off the top of my head.
And neither can I. Let me get Ryan McClanahan in here.
He might have pitched him.
They might have, yeah.
It was Al Nipper.
Al Nipper.
There
that's
you
it.
go.
That's
There you
it.
go.
The famous,
What's going
Al
on?
Nipper.
The famous Al Nipper. There you go.
I'm still trying to forget that 86 World Series. It's only been
that
You
was
got
30
three,
38 years.
McClanahan. You got three. Come on.
Yeah.
Anyway, this is awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Who is the most difficult ball player to research about?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. They've done such wonders now with statistics and going way, way, way back. That was kind of an interesting thing. One thing that I found that is mentioned in Diamond Duels is Cy Young's last game, and he got released from the team that he was on earlier in the year, which was kind of shocking, And he pitched a few successful games, and then the final game he pitched, I think it was either 7 or 8 consecutive hits he gave up. And then they took him out again. And that was it.
Wow.
But can you imagine somebody with, 511 lifetime wins being in the game to give up 8 consecutive hits? So that was kind of fun. One of the ones that I did research on was Christy Matheson, great pitcher. And, just like Walter Johnson and all these guys who, threw 300 innings for all these years and stuff like that, by the end, he was pretty much toast. He was pretty much worn down. And Honus Wagner hit the final home run that Christie gave up was Honus Wagner. And I found out like the details of that, when that game happened. I also did some digging to find out what Mel Ott's very first home run was. And that was Mel Ott was an interesting case. We think of John McGraw as a real hard-ass manager, right? Somebody that's in everybody's face and arguing with the umpires and all this. He kept Mel Ott on the team with that lifting his foot up and that wild hitch and all that. As a 17-year-old, he wouldn't let him go to the minors because he was afraid they'd tinker with that swing. So we don't think of him as being, an expansive, kind of progressive sort of guy, but he really was. And he kind of guided, Mel Ott's career around. He'd let him pinch hit. He'd, let him play a little bit once he got in. And his first home run was an inside the Parker. On a wet, rainy day, hit one over the center fielder's head and ran like hell. And it was at the Polo Grounds. That was 470 feet to center field or something. So that was his first home run. So I write about that in Diamond Duels. So it was fun.
That book out?
It'll be out in March. Good question. It'll be I think March 4th is when it's due to hit the stands. It is on Amazon now, and you can pre-order it if you'd like. And it's just been a lot of fun doing the research on it. It was one of those things where, as a writer, you get interested and you think about, oh, well, what about that? And I kind of got to the point where I'd had a bunch of chapters, and I spoke to my editor, and he goes, "Well, how many words you got?" I told him, "You're done. You're good." So my last chapter is I did a sort of a lengthy, in-depth piece with Jimmy Gosger about his big league career and some of the great pitchers he faced and some of the funny stories he had. He was the guy in left field when, did you guys ever see the movie Zelig, Woody Allen's movie, where he put himself in all these historic moments? Well, Jim Gosger's career was sort of like that. He was, first guy to face Satchel Paige, last guy to face him. He was the guy playing left field when Denny McLain won his 30th game. The guy hit the ball over Jimmy Gosger's head in left field. Yeah, I think you're right. It was like 500. It was a mile to center field. If you ever see the layout for it, you'd be shocked. Did many of the players play for the same team? No, not really. Guys like Musial, Yastrzemski, DiMaggio, Mantle, people like that did. But a lot of the other guys ended up, playing somewhere else. I think Ken Brett was with the Royals all the way through.
Ken Brett was a member of the Red Sox for a while. He played for the Pirates too.
George Brett.
George, yeah.
George Brett. But, a lot of the other guys ended up, with some other team. Even Christy Matheson, his final game was against the Reds. It was the second game of a Labor Day doubleheader, and he pitched against his old nemesis, Mordecai Three-Finger Brown. And they beat the crap out of each other. I think the final was like 14-8, something like that. And Christie got 3 hits off Mordecai. Mordecai got, I think, 2 hits off of him. And Christie got the win, and that gave him the edge in the series by 1 game. Lifetime.
Let's go to Gary Joquin. Gary.
Yeah, just I got 2 or 3 questions. First is the latest edition of Last Time Out, was it 2022?
Yes.
Okay, and I will just listen and totally enjoy whatever else you can share about the interview with John Updike and your favorite memories of Ted Williams.
Well, John Updike was very interesting, and I got a story from him that I hadn't heard before. It turns out that Mr. Updike was actually in Boston to have a fling with a married lady.
And you told me this in Minneapolis.
Lady, yeah, and the married lady didn't show up. So Updike said, well, what the hell, I'll go to Fenway. And, it wasn't hard to get a ticket in those days. And the Red Sox still had a series in New York. So not everybody was 100% sure that was going to be Ted's last game, which of course pissed Ted off because they were, oh, no, yeah, you just left because of the home run. No, he had told, the clubhouse people, hey, I'm not going to New York. He hated playing in Yankee Stadium with the cigarette smoke and everything else. So Updike just, said, what the hell, I'll go to the game. He'd been a fan of Ted Williams all along. And then, of course, once Ted left with the home run, he was like, well, that's the story I got to do. And I was just reading just the other day a book about Roger Angell. And he said that he thinks that really Updike's writing on that particular piece really kind of paved the way for the New Yorker to say, Roger, why don't you go down to spring training and you like baseball, why don't you go down and go from there? And really, he kind of thinks that had Updike never written that piece, that whole baseball career for him, might not have happened. I have an interesting Roger Angell moment too, that I mentioned in last time out. Pete Rose, I think it was 1999. They had the all-century team. Bruce, remember that?
Yes, I do.
In Atlanta. And they had special papal dispensation for Pete Rose to be on the field.
Yeah, the controversy over him getting that special dispensation to go on the field was something to see. I remember that well.
Well, then,
in a sec.
So Pete's walking off the field to come down to the press room, and Jim Gray bombards him with all these
yes.
Remember that? And, he ducked, dodged, and hid, better than Mike Tyson did the other night against Jake Paul. So then he comes down to the press room. Well, all of us writers are down in the press room, so we know nothing about Jim Gray. We know none of this stuff. We're down there waiting for him. So he comes in, sits down, and is Pete Rose. Hilarious, funny, colorful, just the guy that the writers loved. If you had a chance to interview him, which I did a couple of times, you couldn't not like the guy. I mean, I think it was just about impossible. So anyway, Rose is kind of negotiating with all the writers to kind of, you could see he's kind of working them as best he can. You remember all that stuff, and he goes, I'm looking out here and I see a lot of friends. He says, and, I wish this stuff never happened. He said, but, I don't know who I hurt. And as he says that, I just happened to be standing right next to Roger Angell. And Roger Angell says, baseball. And I just thought, boy, what an answer.
Yeah. Pete, we've discussed Pete at length on many of our meetings, and we've had Keith O'Brien in about his book as well, which was very good. But I'm just going to leave it at that and flip to Willie Highland. Willie, you're up, my man. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for asking, Bruce. And thank you, John, for the great presentation so far.
Sure.
My question is, you led with some of your other genres, including the book about President Reagan, and it made me think about Grover Cleveland Alexander, of course, because the winning team. So, have you ever done any research on Grover Cleveland Alexander's career?
A little bit. He was still a hard thrower. People kind of forget that, but I mean, the guy was a hard thrower, and he really had a wonderful career, and surprising longevity for considering the alcohol problems that he had. He was an impressive guy. He wasn't one that I mentioned in the book. I remember trying to look stuff up about him. I don't think there was any particular really good story about his last game, so that's why I didn't include him. But
yeah, I always find his career to be a little bit enigmatic compared to a lot of the other pitchers of that time frame or that time period. So that's why I asked. The only thing I know about, I probably would have never have heard of him despite being a huge baseball fan, if not for the Reagan movie from well before my lifetime.
Well, the story about Reagan was when he was elected president-elect, he got a tour of the Capitol. And so he came on to this desk, this famous desk that Tip O'Neill had, Speaker of the House. And Tip O'Neill and Reagan says, "Ooh, that's a beautiful desk," and Tip O'Neill says, "Well, yeah, that was Grover Cleveland's, and the only two-time president until Donald Trump to be elected to 2 terms, not consecutively." And Reagan looks at me and goes, "Yeah, I played him in a movie." And Tip O'Neill said, "No, Mr. President, you played an alcoholic reliever for the St. Louis Cardinals. This is Grover Cleveland." Oh.
That's very funny. And Douglas Rubin in the chat says Doris Day movie. That's also true. Probably more Doris Day than President Reagan. She had a way better acting career.
Yep, that's true.
Thank you.
You bet.
All right, last one for tonight is Dixie Tarango. Dixie, what's going on?
Good. John, good presentation.
Thank you.
I would hope his last hit got Clemente in your book.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That was a big moment. That was a big moment. And honestly, just personally speaking for my son got traded to the Pirates in July of 2021. And in his very first game, the right fielder had hurt his knee sliding into second base. Now, my son's a first baseman. They asked him to go out and play right field for the 9th inning. And in Pittsburgh Stadium, they have Clemente's name on the right field wall.
Yep.
So when my son ran out to play right field, I had my binoculars on him, and he's just kind of blown away. Here his first game with the Pirates, and he gets to go out and play right field. And he looked up at the Clemente thing, and he touched his heart, wow. I think 2 or 3 years earlier, when he was playing in the Dominican, he got invited over to the guy. He used to be the Yankees. He played for the Red Sox a little bit too. The catcher with the great arm. He used to throw people out from second base. Tony Pena, that's it. Sorry, couldn't think of his name for a second there. He got invited to his house, and that night, phone rings at 1:30 in the morning. Dad, I got to hold Roberto Clemente's bat.
Oh, wow.
I mean, that's cool. That's cool.
One final thing on Cy Young, as he's playing out that last year of his, he gave up 3 home runs in one game, 2 of them to one person. The only time in 22 years that he gave up 2 home runs to one batter in a single game. Who was it?
I don't know. Cy Williams?
Everybody knows his name.
They didn't hit a lot of home runs in those days.
Right?
And this guy didn't hit a lot of home runs anyway, but he hit 2 that day.
True speaker.
Fred Merkel.
Fred Merkel. So he did something good after a while. He's a Fred Boner, right? He did some good things.
Yeah. All right, John, tell them where to get the books, my man.
Both of the books are on Amazon. Actually, all my books are on Amazon. The Dylan book, the Nashua book, and Last Time Out. Diamond Duels will be out in March. I think it is available from what they tell me for pre-order, if you'd like to do that. And of course, I'd be happy, if you do get it and you'd like me to sign it or anything, I'd be happy to do that. One other thing for being baseball fans and stuff, I started a Substack back in May. And I don't always write about baseball. I write about music and a bunch of other things on there, but it's free, and I'd welcome anybody that'd like to join it. And it's just John Nogowski at substack.com. You're welcome to come on and join in. And I have some baseball things on there, and I'll be obviously putting some more in as we get closer to the release date of the book.
Send me a link to that. I'll put it in the Monday message this coming Monday.
I'll do it.
All right. Next week, Monday, November 25th, we'll have Alan Holst with us, and he'll be giving his Saber 52 presentation entitled Rose-Colored Glasses and Foggy Lenses, looking at Hall of Fame voting by the BBWAA. The sign-up link is in the chapter meeting booklet and on SABR's events calendar at saber.org/events. And finally, if you're a baseball fan watching on YouTube and you like what you see, please like this video and subscribe to our channel to be alerted to each of our uploads. And if you're not yet a member, you need to join the Society for American Baseball Research, the premier baseball community. Offering an amazing baseball buffet of options to explore your fandom, SABR boasts more than 35 different research communities, over 80 regional chapters, and innumerable options to connect with baseball minds across the world. For more information, go to saber.org/join today. John Nogowski, you are fantastic. Thank you very much for doing this. I really appreciate you.
Oh, you're welcome. It's my pleasure. And it was nice to meet everybody. Thank you for the great questions. And, let's hope we can do this again. Maybe when we get a little closer to Diamond Duels coming out, we can come up with some fun things too.
That'd be perfect. Well, let's get everybody out of here so that they can attend Boston's Zoom social this night. We will see you next Monday. Have a good night, everybody.
Great job.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.